Welcome to Next in Nonprofits. I'm Steve Boland, and I am very pleased to be joined today by Carly Berna. She is the fundraiser in residence at Virtuous. Carly, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
I was really excited to learn about a particular project that you've been working with just recently. But before we dive into the specifics of that, could you just introduce Virtuous and your role there? What is Virtuous? What do you do?
Sure. Virtuous is a modern technology platform. We have CRM, online giving, and an AI donor assistant. So, three different products you can use. I actually was a Virtuous customer for 7 years before working at Virtuous starting 2 years ago. So, I was the Chief Marketing Development Officer in the nonprofit space here in Phoenix and moved my CRM over to Virtuous and then joined the team 2 years ago. But at the time, I was really looking for an innovative, modern platform that could kind of run alongside me as I was leading fundraising, and Virtuous was that for me.
So made that transition a couple of years ago, which in terms of our topic for today about AI usage in nonprofit organizations, especially around the fundraising space, was like 107 years ago, right? In 2 years, now
Yes.
it's just how the pace of this change has gone is just amazing. And you and a partner organization at Fundraising AI did some research, surveyed some hundreds of organizations, just published those results just in December of 25. So it's pretty fresh information. And we'll have a link in the show notes for people that haven't had a chance to see the full report. They can download that, take a look at it and the recommendations. I won't steal your thunder. Carly, can you just kind of jump with a couple of the highlights of the findings before we get into what do we learn and do about that?
Yeah, so late in 2025, we were like, okay, AI is this big topic, right? We're all talking about it, but what are nonprofits actually doing about it? I hadn't seen any real data. So we sent out a survey to both Virtuous customers and non-customers and had over 300 organizations respond just to see, like, honestly, we were just looking for real results of how people were using it. I think the biggest stat that you'll see if you download the report is that 92% of those that were surveyed are using AI in some capacity. Now, that could be like ChatGPT, to something more advanced. So they're using it in some capacity, but only 7% were having major strategic impact. So it felt like maybe everyone was dabbling a bit, but not everyone had really figured out how to help it move their mission forward.
It's a big differential in the numbers. And I do think that as you just discuss in the report, the trying something is a good, step, and that's all wonderful. But to get past the trying phase can be a bit of a leap for some folks mentally, anyway. And just ahead of recording, we were talking a little bit about my own experiences of, I tried this model 6 months ago. I tried that model a year ago. I tried this at this point, and each of them responded differently and with different impacts. How does the report help draw into what are effective organizations doing that are different from, well, I tried that model and I didn't really like it, so I moved away from it? Where are people that are getting into that 7% of seeing some big impact doing things differently?
Yeah, there you can see in the report where AI is being used across the board. So if you're wondering like what types of things are we using AI for? Is it marketing communications? Is it operations? What is that? So you can see that, but then really diving into the 7%. And honestly, I am not like decades, I haven't been decades in the nonprofit space, but
Mhm.
to me, the transition to AI is just like every other change management process we've probably ever dealt with in our careers. So when you look at the 7%, we really narrowed it down to like 6 steps of what that 7% we're doing. And again, it really comes down to general change management steps like having a policy, documenting what works, having a cross-functional team. So we can walk through those more if you want. But as I was reading those, I was thinking, oh, I've used these same steps when I was moving my CRM, when I was doing other change management. So it's just
Mhm.
that it's now being applied to this AI transformation.
I feel like the report is suggesting some more urgency than past changes, though. That if, right now, there are maybe organizations that are figuring it out that are kind of getting along the way. Things are changing, but the speed of the change may be more different now than we've experienced with, everybody moved to online giving platforms. And if you happen to take a year to do it, fine.
Yeah.
There was a pace of change that seemed to be more I don't know, feels almost luxurious at this point, as opposed to the tools themselves are changing very quickly, and the expectations, I think, of other organizations that may be able to take advantage of those tools feels like it's asking people, you need to step in sooner. I really do feel like in your report in particular, it's like now's the time. You should be starting to think about how are you going to systematize this change, but maybe you don't want a planning committee that meets in fiscal 27.
Yes.
It might be something sooner than that.
Yeah, there's a kind of a footnote in the report when we look at those 6 steps, and it says these foundations take days or weeks to build, not months. And I
Yeah.
think that's the key is when we've thought about change management in the past, you're right. It's like, okay, let's get the committee together. Let's set up the monthly meeting. Let's create the policy. It's like you can make a policy in ChatGPT in seconds and have people edit it. So the way to move it forward is also very quickly. So it shouldn't take months or years to do it. It can be done quickly, and it shouldn't seem as overwhelming as perhaps past change has.
Yeah. We've been having conversations within Next in Nonprofits where I work about how we use the tool, having policies around what's okay and what's not okay, but also looking for a champion within the organization that can demonstrate some success. And I do feel like one of the very first things that person on our team was getting to the rest of us was if you're using the free version of the thing and you think that you're
Mhm.
using the thing, you're not really using the thing. The speed of change of these models is really pretty substantial, and the availability of what you get in the paid version of a lot of these. And there's, if you look at the downloadable report, you'll see some very familiar logos from OpenAI and Anthropic and Grok, and all of these things are talked about. But I do feel like, and I don't know if this has actually been part of the differentials in the report that you were looking at, is when you said you're using AI, are you paying for AI or are you kind of sneaking in on the cheap and maybe not feeling like you're getting the same product as somebody who's being more successful?
Yeah, I don't think we actually asked about free or paid, but one thing I will note, and we say this to all of our nonprofits, is if you're going to be using AI, definitely pay for the different LLMs, whether it's Claude or ChatGPT. And one of the main reasons for that is so that you aren't afraid to input organizational data. I would definitely not put any donor data into a public LLM. But when you can start using LLMs, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, etc., in the paid version where you can start putting your organization's data in there, that's when the impact becomes more transformational instead of just, putting in only anything you felt that is public.
Yeah. No, I appreciate as you look at policies, that was one of the first ones that we talked about. No donor data, period, as far as we're concerned, because we're just not comfortable when you get told by your collaborative partner, oh, no, no, your data is going to stay with just in the sandbox. And it's like, really? I how about if we just don't give you that? How about if we
Yeah.
work within other things and then we take the information from you and bring it into systems that we feel we have a little bit more control in? So we do have a policy on our team. No personally identifiable donor information ever gets loaded in. Aggregate stuff, we have these donor
Mhm.
bands, we have this many lapsed donors versus this many recurring, and those kinds of things. I think is fine, but we are concerned about that level of connection, and certainly in free models, I think people are more concerned that you're just feeding training data into something that's going to get used somewhere else. So I appreciate you kind of thinking through like, well, don't put your donor data into a free thing for sure, and if you're going to be putting donor data anywhere, you better be pretty confident in where it's sitting. Your own CRM, it's already there, right? I mean, the donor data is already in that. So
Yeah.
it's that horse has left that barn, as it were. So I do think that integrated tools that are already part of things that you're using, you know, take
Mhm.
advantage of them. But I do think it's interesting to look at the underlying technologies of some of those other tools and kind of where they're at. So as you think about the results and what you've seen, and I would like to kind of step through some of those success things, but I want to poke a little bit at where people have gotten to in order to get to those successful pieces, is, how they feel like they're working with these tools as prompts and advisors different from agentic tools, which may be a little bit more in the future that maybe are not quite doing the things that we want to. And for folks that are not as familiar with the lingo, you were saying LLM earlier for a large
Mhm.
language model, versus agentic tools, these agents that actually could physically, well, not physically, they could through programming, start making things happen. Send an email on your behalf, schedule a meeting on your behalf, those kinds of things, as opposed to summarizing data somewhere that you'd then have to bring into a meeting. Those are different types of technologies and different data to bring into it. So, how much data do you give to one of these tools in order for it to be able to really work with you?
Yeah, I think it depends on the role too. We actually had a virtual event a couple of weeks ago where we talked about this report, and there was thousands of nonprofits on there, and I could see all of the chat. I used Claude to scrape the chat and summarize it because I was like, what are these people saying about all the things we're talking about? And honestly, many nonprofits were just getting into the chat GPT stage.
Hmm.
Many of them weren't even familiar with Claude. And we were talking about Claude Cowork and like all of these different things that, you're
Yeah.
saying in agentic models. And it was like that was way above where they were at. So I think they are at that chat GPT kind of prompt engineering stage. Um, but we've also thought through and talked about how nonprofits can use AI depending on the role. So whether they're a
Yeah.
DBA or a fundraiser or a major gift officer, what's the best way to use it? So obviously, like you're asking how much data to put in. The DBA is the one that's probably the most nervous because they have all the donor data. And do they want to upload that? That's a question that honestly is one of the 6 steps. Decide how your nonprofit feels about policies and guidelines, put a box around what you're comfortable doing, where someone on marketing is more comfortable saying, hey, here's our public website, use it for a branding and tone guideline, and help me write this email or this social media post or whatever. So I think depending on the role, those use cases are more advanced or not. And it's figuring out how much data each of those roles need to put in to get what they want out of it. But it's that question about like donor data and having a policy around that that's most important.
Yeah, I think one of the other areas of fundraising that gets talked about with AI a lot is grants development work. And here's where I think it is, when it trips into more agentic use, it's going to become substantially more important, I think, to have already had some experience in policy. Because my experience doing a lot of grants right now is, getting all of this stuff from a grants platform that somebody else is managing that requires a login, that requires you to push buttons. There's all sorts of data entry that has to happen within their grants platform that a human can see and copy and paste and click buttons and select drop down menus and all the rest of it. But AI systems haven't, until maybe real soon or recently or whatever, been as reliable at like take this information and load everything into this platform for me.
Mhm.
So it feels like in that part of the fundraising world, it hasn't been as helpful, other than my first transformational experience around this was in word count, where I have a lot of great language in a grant application, and they tell me I can have 500 words or 1,000 characters or whatever their limit is, and I'm like, ah. And it is pretty easy to load that kind of language into almost any, even some of the free models, and to say, I need this said better in 500 words or 1,000
Mhm.
characters or whatever.
Yep.
Then you can paste it in and great. But I feel like there's that feeling within the fundraising community of, is this really saving me any time? Because I still have to go in and click the buttons and move the thing. And that's where
Yeah.
all the time consuming gets happening.
Yeah.
So where we're thinking about the time savings, what's really working, and that is one of your steps here. And maybe this is a good moment to just transition to talk about those. Um, Maybe in the grant process, there's still not quite where it needs to be yet for some of those things. Once the text has been kind of approved and everybody feels good about where the text is at, then there's going to have to be a human that pops text into the right places and selects the right drop-down options. But maybe we could talk a little bit about of those people that are seeing more meaningful impact. There's these 6 steps that you're recommending organizations start taking right now if they haven't already done it. Could you
Mhm.
just walk those through and talk a little bit about how you think that that can happen?
Yeah, I want to comment on something you just said
Hmm.
and give an example. You said some organizations might not feel comfortable putting their donor data in an LLM because
Right?
they have a CRM. It's already in the CRM, so how can it be used in the CRM? Virtuous actually has a tool called Virtuous Momentum, which is an AI donor assistant. And it just makes me think about what you're talking about here and the time saving. So, what it does is if you're a major gift officer, it's connected to your CRM, whether that's Salesforce, Blackbaud, Virtuous, whatever. It goes and, if you're a major gift officer, usually you're researching that donor. When did I talk to them last? Remind me their wife's name, remind me their dog's name, remind me their kid, what did they give last, whatever. It goes and it researches all that for you. It gives you a summary. It writes the next email based on all of that research, and then you can edit it before it's sent, or it gives you talking points if you're going to call
Hmm.
them. So you don't have to do all of that, going through the notes, going through their giving history, trying to determine kind of where they're at. And you're not using an LLM, so you're not putting your donor data somewhere. It's connected within, and it's doing all of that summarizing and then writing for you in your own tone, in your own voice. And that's where I've seen people have the most efficiency because just think of all the time savings of all of that manual administrative work. And then writing it, you're just doing a quick edit and sending it out or calling them and reading the talking points. That's where I've seen the like transformational time savings, even with some of our own customers, where probably a major gift officer doesn't want this, but they can double their caseload size because now they can handle more donors because they're not doing all that administrative work.
Hmm.
So that's where I've seen a lot of the power, especially if someone is concerned about like, I'm not ready to put my donor data into a model yet. So like you mentioned, we kind of looked at that 7% and asked a bunch of questions in the survey of like what they were doing and then trying to figure out what did they implement to get to that 7%. So I'll kind of walk through these and pause if you have any commentary for
That'd be
each of
great.
them. But the first one, which again kind of goes back to the whole change management piece, is creating a cross-functional AI team. I think that this can sound intimidating because most people are like, I'm not an AI expert, so why would I be on a cross-functional AI team? But the truth is that none of us are AI experts. Like this is all totally new. Um,
Yeah.
and we talk internally about being all it matters to be an AI expert is to just be curious and be curious about the tools, try things out, experiment. So when you're thinking about a cross-functional team, you don't have to grab all the AI experts, but those who are will be curious, lean in, be from different departments. And so that was kind of the first step of, having a team that's thinking about this as a focus.
So, with the end goal of this is going to free up some time to do other things or save some time, my gut reaction on anything like this is, oh goodness, more meetings. Oh no,
Yeah,
are we saving
yeah,
time if we have to pull everybody into meetings? You're advocating though that these are not years-long projects. These are not meetings that are going to be
right.
happening every 2 weeks for a real long period of
Yeah.
time. So, how do people think about the timing that they might be using to get some ground rules in place?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, this team should be stood up to figure out the next two steps, which is an AI governance policy and an acceptable use policy.
Okay.
And having those people from each of the different teams is so they can represent, well, I'd be putting in financial data, I'd be putting in donor data. What things are we okay with? What are we not okay with? So just making sure you're getting the perspective of all the departments that could be using it. And again, this is something where you can draft something out of ChatGPT or something like it, and then have that team edit it. But that team is really there to help represent those different departments. And again, that shouldn't be a long process. It's just like setting up the guidelines internally. We've seen that if those guidelines aren't set up, either people aren't doing anything or they're going totally rogue. So setting up those guidelines allows you to do that. So that would be kind of the output of the team is like, what are these guidelines and let's roll them out to the organization.
And in successful groups, that can be done fairly quickly. But that's not something
Absolutely.
that, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it feels like if this is all new to you, it's like, well, I have to go learn everything there is to learn about this stuff in order to do it. And honestly, when we built our first policy where I work, we just told the machine to start the first draft. We went
Exactly.
to a tool and
Yeah.
we're like, we need a policy that does these things. Here's our concerns. Give me a draft policy that I can start working with. And then people are responding to something rather than trying to create it from whole cloth. And I think
Yeah.
then when you see like we can't ever touch donor data, well, wait a minute, I need to know this, and then you get a chance to have the conversation and build the right thing. So I appreciate that it doesn't have to take that long, and you don't have to know everything about it going in.
Yeah. I would also say that if you are maybe not a leader at a nonprofit, you're like, how do I get started? I'm not the one making these decisions. I'm not creating the cross-functional team. And there's no one else at your nonprofit. Just lean in and be the person. Like, draft the AI policy and bring it to your leader and say, hey, I think we need to think about this. I drafted the policy, and I'd love for us to put some guidelines around so we can use this. So I think that's the power of this too, is it's not like something where you need to wait for maybe your leadership team to get going. You could present it to them and hopefully be the like AI adoption champion.
Yeah, and you may need to share this report with some folks and really talk about some of the urgency here. That if there was ever a time when people got together and said, "Oh yeah, this is a change management thing, and we usually take 18 months, 24 months to do a thing, so we'll start a process." I do think to look at the speed of how we see the tools changing and really say, we maybe sooner. Maybe sooner than 18 months or 24
Yeah.
months. And if they feel the need as a small advocate to have a voice behind you, there's some good thinking in the report you can share with leadership to maybe get that sense of urgency.
Yeah. The next step in the kind of the six frameworks is document what works. I think this is crucial for what's happening with AI. I mean, even we talked about, at the beginning, like AI is moving so quickly. Say your adoption champion leaves the organization. Now, none of the workflows or even the prompts that we're using could be gone. So whether that's just documenting prompts, hey, this is what we use for our newsletter prompt or whatever it is, so that that can be passed along and can be edited and kept up to date as AI changes. That way you're not putting all this investment into AI and then kind of losing the work that you've done.
I think good to think at this moment too that those will be dynamic over time too. That as much as you learn this prompt is working right now in these models, it seems to do what we do. Ideally, it's going to get better. It will maybe require a little bit less manipulation because I think in the earlier days of prompt engineering, it was sort of, you had to tell a lot of people back in the olden days would tell the machine to please don't hallucinate, right? Like first prompt, don't
Yeah.
make something up. I need you
Yeah.
to not give me fake data.
Yes.
And that had to be part of the process. I don't know that that's as necessary these days. I think that that's more engineered into the products, but it depends on what you're using and where you're using it. But I do expect that if you get that person on your team who's helping to create systems and whatnot, the tools that we're using these systems on are evolving rapidly. And we're just going to
Mhm.
have to adapt the idea that when they change that process, they need to document that change so that the rest of us are able to pick up and move forward with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
The fifth thing is pair the right tools with the right strategy. And I think this can be broad across the board, even if we're just talking about LLMs, which I'll use Gemini, ChatGPT, and Claude. They all should be used for different things. Like in my experience, Claude is great for writing, ChatGPT is great for research. Gemini, which is embedded within Google, is great for looking at Word documents, like if you're using the cloud, Google Workspace, Excel, etc. So you can ask it right there. I was just working in an Excel sheet and I was like, okay, can you summarize this data for me so that instead of me like filtering the rows and like figuring it out and summing it. Um, so know those well so you're using the right tool. And then when it comes to like investing in software or, choosing some of the other AI tools that are out there, just like we were talking before, like make sure you have the right tool with the strategy. If it is your major gift officers, look for a AI tool that's specific for major gift officers instead of trying to, adapt something different. So I think what can seem overwhelming right now is there are so many AI tools, and
Yeah.
it's like, even for myself, it's like every day someone's like, "Hey, have you heard of such and such?" And I'm like, "No, I just was learning about that other tool last week." So that can be kind of overwhelming. So I think focusing on one area at a time. Hey, we want to, pick the most inefficient process we have right now and figure out where we can improve. Make it seem, a little easier instead of trying to tackle everything at once.
Yeah, right ahead of recording, we were just talking. We're recording this at the end of March in 26, and OpenAI just announced that they were closing the Sora project, the video creation tool that they had put a lot of public energy into in order to redirect some things. And I think that kind of announcement about change can be uncomfortable to audiences that are like, boy, if an organization that's worth that much money just bails on a tool of that scale with relatively little public notice, I feel uncomfortable with, what's going on here. How do I invest in, the right tool if the tool might be pulled out from under me? And it is a little dynamic out there. It's challenging.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's where you have to. I think part of that goes back to the cross-functional team a little bit. Is that
Yeah.
everyone there is kind of paying attention to different things, so you can use them. Like, oh, hey, the Sora tool calls. Oh, well, there's this other tool we can use instead.
Yep.
Like, kind of use your resources to help navigate and figure out all of that. Um, the last piece of the six steps is measure results.
Hmm.
And there's lots of different ways you could measure. I mean, we talk about hours saved as one way of measuring. I mean, you could measure ROI, et cetera. I was on a webinar a couple of weeks ago where the panelist was talking about measure results based on removing friction from the donor experience. And I was like, I really like that. That's interesting. If your main thing is having a better donor experience, think about how can you use AI to remove friction. But what we recommend in the report is to pick one metric to track for 30 days, whether that's time saved, quality improvements, number of use cases that become a standard practice. What's that one metric, and how are you seeing that change over 30 days? So, again, this is not a year-long project, but what's changed in 30 days? How do we want to iterate or change things for the next 30 days?
Yeah. We actually brushed by one of the earlier steps a little quickly on the acceptable use policy, kind of defining a governance template and acceptable use differently. And I appreciate how in the report you broke those things out. And I'm wondering if I could ask you to just kind of call back for a second on what kind of policy issues might come up in what's acceptable for us to do, but what is governance different from that? How do we think about those things differently?
Yeah, and I'll also say that if you download the report, we have templates for both of
Yeah.
these in there. So if you're like, where do I start with this? Like you can use those. There's buttons in there. On the AI governance side, I would say this is when you're thinking about who is evaluating new tools. So, you don't want everyone just going rogue using all sorts of tools that you're putting information into. Who's deciding when curiosity and experiments become something you want to put into standard practice? Oh, we tried this thing. Now we want the whole organization to adopt that. And then kind of like a charter of defining who makes decisions and what the review cadence is. So a little bit more of like governmental structure, if you want to call it. And then the acceptable use policy is more like what type of AI use is encouraged, what requires approval, what's prohibitive. Kind of like we were saying, do we upload donor data? Do we not upload donor data? If we do, are there certain places that we're okay doing it? Or do we want to anonymize the data? Do we want to do aggregate data? All those types of like acceptable use issues. And again, we did see even on a qualitative, just talking to a lot of nonprofits, that when there was no guidelines, there was less AI use because people were like super unsure. The
Mhm.
more those guidelines were put in place, the more the nonprofit staff felt more comfortable experimenting within those guidelines.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think if you think about donor data, we've all been so very protective of that for those of us that have been working in this field. that's going to be a more natural one, as opposed to some guardrails around things like agentic use that we were just talking about. Maybe you do not want systems that are actually able to interact with your email tool and
Yeah.
accidentally send a message that you just were not sure was ready to go out or whatever. It may be that for right now your acceptable use is language generation, but not giving it the ability to actually engage a campaign or something.
Right.
But it's good to put those opportunities a little bit clearer, and I really appreciated how in the report you kind of broke those two things out to think about it. So let's talk a little bit about that urgency for a moment, if we may. The report is trying to, I think, appropriately call attention to the speed at which these changes are happening, and that this is maybe the time for people to really be involved in it. And I don't want to get alarmist about, your nonprofit's going out of business tomorrow if you haven't invested X dollars into an AI tool.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that, but there is sort of a moment of opportunity to learn here and start engaging. And some of us are maybe being dragged along a little bit, but it's the world we're living in. And I don't know if you can either think of a story or two from any of the people you've talked with, or just in general, why 26, or is it all going to be different in the middle of 26 and it's going to be completely different again in 27? So maybe it doesn't matter as much. I mean, where is the urgency to really start working on this now?
Yeah, it kind of goes to the why behind the report. We definitely weren't
Yeah.
putting it out to be alarmist either, because, well, one, we honestly didn't know what the data was going to say. We're going to be like, is no one using AI? Is everyone using it? But I think, and because I worked in nonprofit, like I loved benchmarking myself against other nonprofits to be like, where am I at? Where am I behind? Where are we doing well? And so that was really the heart behind it, which is, okay, if you're thinking about how are we using AI at my nonprofit, this is really supposed to be kind of a comparison for you to say, okay, yeah, we fall into that 92%. We're maybe dabbling in it, or maybe we haven't touched it at all. So we're in the 8% that haven't used it at all and maybe should, start being curious, or we fall into the 7%. So, we are making strategic impact, and maybe we're ahead of the curve, maybe early adopters. But I think it was more of that, of like, how are we using it? Like I mentioned in the report, it says X% are using it for data, communications, marketing, emails, et cetera. So you can kind of gut check your own use against that and get some ideas as well. And then the framework is really supposed to help the majority of nonprofits who are dabbling, saying, okay, this is how you move to that 7%. Because no, most nonprofits I talk to are, there are some that are a bit concerned and worried, but I also hear many say, we're using it, but I haven't actually seen any impact. So we're not sure if we should keep using it and keep investing in it or not. And so that's why that framework is supposed to help say, okay, if we can spin this up in days to weeks, let's see if that helps reach that transformational strategic impact. So that's really the heart is like, I definitely am not saying the sky is falling or anything like that, but this technology is coming into our industry, and how are we going to use it and what can we use it to be the most efficient? We talk all the time about how nonprofits are such a trust-based industry, right? It's
Right.
relationships with your donors. Um, if you take that relational piece out, like that will never succeed for a nonprofit. So AI should be used to remove a lot of the manual work. So you have more time for those relationships. That's the key. So we do not see AI as a replacement for humans or people in any way, but it's more about how can we get rid of some of that administrative work that takes nonprofits a lot of time so they can spend more time with their donors, building those actual relationships.
Is there, now that you've been through this process with the partners at Fundraising AI, is there a thinking of when do we revisit this? When do we think about this again? Because the speed of change is pretty
Yeah,
crazy, and there's probably only so much time with your teams to just research reports. I mean, you've got other things to do too.
yeah.
Is that something you're thinking about at this point?
Yeah, when I first started at Virtuous, I helped put out our first benchmark report, which was a couple of years ago, and we do that annually. But when this came out and we were talking to Fundraising AI, we're like, should we be putting this out quarterly? Like every 6 months? I don't know. It feels like AI is moving so quickly. Annually will
Right.
be, if you think about how you yourself was using AI a year ago, it's very different than how you're using it now, just because of the speed of change. And, like you said, some of the tech improvements, like hallucinations being less and things like that. So I would say like we don't have like a set date, but I would imagine that probably a 6 month cadence is probably what we're thinking. Annual seems a bit too infrequent, and it probably because of the speed, we probably need to measure it more. But it will be really interesting to see based on this report as kind of our baseline. How do these numbers change? Like, does that 7% grow, or are people continuing to struggle with that? What are those areas? So we're really interested to see that, but we definitely think we need to do more frequent surveying on this specific topic.
Yeah. And as much as the big names are out there with a lot of investment and time and energy behind them and whatnot, I guess I would also encourage people as you're thinking about these 6 steps and whatnot to look at the tools you are currently using and see, you've probably seen an email like, hey, this AI thing can do this with our tool now, and maybe didn't think too much about it. We at Next to Nonprofits use a tool called Instrumental for the grant writing component of what we do, and have been very pleased with that as a search and management tool for grant prospecting and writing. But of course, they're coming out with we've got an AI tool very specific for the grant process. It costs money. You should invest in it. And, I'm like any other person that's ever worked in a nonprofit. I'm like, oh, money, money hurts. Oh, no, not
Yeah.
money. Um, it's not that much money, but it was really a challenge for me to kind of get over that hump of we already use this tool. It's
Mhm.
got a specific component built into it that we could be testing. For us, we're a Google Workspace shop. Many nonprofits are because it's a free thing for nonprofit organizations. We actually have to pay for that because we're a service provider. But because we are a Google Workspace shop, we're getting Gemini whether we wanted it or not. There is no turning it off. You've really going to have to decide: are we going to lean into using that and testing it, or are we going to just ignore that it's there and it's still going to be there whether we ignore it or not? And I think those are the moments for nonprofits to go, do you have a Google Workspace account or are you a Microsoft shop? In which case, you probably got Copilot integrated into something, whether you thought about that or not. Um,
Yes.
Test those things and then maybe see, does it call for a different tool? Is there something else that maybe, is out there? You mentioned your tool can integrate to other CRM platforms. So it's not just a virtuous tool. It is something that can be used with other
Yep.
management tools. Okay.
It's called Virtuous Momentum. And that's the AI donor tool I was talking about. And yeah, it works with other CRMs besides Virtuous. But the magic of it is the integration with the other CRMs because it's pulling out all that donor data that we were talking
Yeah.
about from like a donor history perspective. But to what you just said, I think when you're thinking about if you're going to purchase an AI tool, I would think about will there be legitimate ROI out of this or not? Like if you're going to spend money, which I totally know, stewardship of donors was a huge part when I was in nonprofit. Like you want to know, oh, this is something that we're going to be way more efficient or make back or whatever versus, oh, this will just have maybe an incremental increase that isn't worth it. So I think thinking through that is important too when you're evaluating those tools. And then the other thing I would say, and you probably know this too, is everyone's claiming that they have AI in their products. So
That's true.
honestly, really looking at like what is the impact of AI, quote unquote, in their products? Like, how will that actually be impactful? Because I just feel like I'm getting marketed to all the time, like we all
Hmm.
are. Like, AI is in such and such. And I'm like, well, how? And what is it going to do? So, asking questions, even if you're not sure how to ask or frame it, like ask the basic questions of, what does this do? How does this improve? Because I feel like AI is kind of a buzzword right now that you have to dig a bit deeper
Right.
to figure out, what's actually behind that word AI.
Yeah. And just a quick anecdote. We're about out of time. I'm going to have to wrap up pretty quickly here, but not related to any of the fundraising and all these other sorts of tools. It being in everything. I was a user of the Amazon Alexa tools from the get-go. Well,
Yeah.
11 years ago, I got my first Echo, and I'm like, this is fantastic. I can talk to this machine, and it answers me, and this is wonderful. The baseline Alexa tool does not function nearly as well as it used to anymore. They have somehow or another broken the base tool in order to move people to Alexa Plus, which I haven't used because I didn't want AI integrated into a machine that I just wanted it to tell me what the temperature is outside. That's all I needed. You
Yeah.
know, I don't want an AI conversation with the machine that's just going to tell me what time is dusk tonight because I want to walk my dog while it's still light out. And it can't do that anymore. It used to tell me, and now it's like, yeah, I can't do that. I'm like,
Yeah.
so there are these challenges of AIs in everything. But what does that mean for the baseline tools that we're used to using, and how are they changing those versus what's the more advanced system? And is it a lot more expensive, or is it just that we as nonprofit professionals just cringe every time it's another $20 or $30 or whatever?
Yeah.
That is just difficult to adjust to, even though we may be pretty easily in this 30-day kind of process that you're talking about, looking at results, be able to say, yeah, we made or saved more than $30. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Same with honestly, even the cost of the basic LLMs. Like it's a
Yeah.
very small cost.
Yes.
Um, but if you're able to, upload your donor data, or upload information to do more than you were doing with the free version, like it would be totally worth it. But I know
Yeah.
any cost is like, oh, well, for me, it was like, I got to get my CFO to sign off on this and I got to tell him why it's important and, all of that.
Right. When the basic tools, as you mentioned, if you're going to use Claude or whatever, it's not that much money to
No.
use the paid version. It is a dramatically different experience. So if you've been thinking to yourself, I went to ChatGPT and I didn't like it, and I do think thinking about the different tools and trying a paid version and trying some things like this is a really important moment. And if it doesn't quite do what you're thinking it's going to do today, I do think looking at when are you repeating the experiment, because the world is changing so quickly.
Yeah.
So even if it's a little, maybe not 100% where you want it to be yet, I wouldn't sit on it a year.
Yeah.
I do think that that's a thing.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. I think we maybe have even tripped a moment over our time. So, Carly, I really appreciate you taking a moment to share this. There's links in the show notes to both Virtuous and the report that you can download. There's a cool little website version of it too. We'll put if it's all right, Carly, we'll put a link to that in too. Is that all right
Yeah, you can put
to
that in.
share? Great. We'll put those into the show notes. Carly Berna is the fundraiser in residence for Virtuous, and I'm so grateful for your time today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.